Well, good morning and welcome to Friday of the second week of Lent. It's a beautiful story that unfolds for us today in Genesis chapter 37. Story of Joseph and his brothers, and not only the incredible love that Joseph's father had for him, but certainly the deceit and the eventual betrayal of Joseph's brothers, who eventually leave him for dead, and by way of that, he finds himself imprisoned in Egypt. Of course, the story of Joseph is an amazing one. Of course, Joseph is exalted by God, eventually at the end of that story becoming the most influential person in Egypt to the Pharaoh. That whole nation of Israel will eventually make themselves in Egypt, where they will prosper before being enslaved by Pharaoh many, many years later. But it's all through Joseph and the way that God works in Joseph's life, even in the midst of the betrayal from his own brothers. And in the psalm today, Israel reflects back on the story in Psalm 105. The whole psalm is about how God worked in the midst of all that, and how God was in the midst of a very dark season of betrayal and deceit and almost murder. How he didn't make any of that happen, but he was just there and in the midst of it, and later worked miracles through that. So Israel today says, remember the marvels the Lord has done. That's a responsorial psalm for today. It comes from Psalm 105, verse 5. Remember the marvels the Lord has done. It's important for us to remember. It's important for us to remember the marvels the Lord has done for us. Especially when life maybe throws you a curveball or life gets hard. I think the enemy usually attacks our memory first. When you are struggling, either with sin, as Lent invites us to look at, or just with life or people or yourself or your own inadequacies and the things that you don't like about yourself, whatever the struggle may be, whether it's an external struggle or an internal struggle, it's easy for us to forget how God has been faithful to us in the past, and then in the darkness and in the struggle, we simply presume that God's not with us now. And maybe even if there's a lot of spiritual desolation, we'll fall into the trap of believing that God is not ever going to be with us again. And darkness, struggle, it claims our memory. And then when we feel alone, it just further compounds the felt sense of isolation, and of course, that's what makes the struggle even more difficult. So Israel today says, hey, let us remember the marvels the Lord has worked for us. Let us remember the marvels the Lord has done. Let us not forget what God has done. Joseph's circumstances are incredibly extreme, and yet Joseph persevered through the entire thing, and God later did incredible, miraculous things through his life. And if you're going through a tough time today, if you're struggling today, remember the marvels the Lord has done. God's worked in your life in the past. God has been there for you in the past. And even if it's tough to see him now, remember the marvels the Lord has done. Let us not forget today. No matter what you're facing, let us not forget. And remember, the same God who was with you in the past is the same God who is with you today, no matter what you're facing. Remember. God bless you.